Hello, and welcome to Hospitality and the Infinite Game, a podcast series focused on answering one simple question. What type of hospitality industry do we actually want to create? In these episodes, Michael and David discuss big ideas that might set the foundation for a different model of success. A model which would allow us to piece together a bold new way forward, where our businesses can thrive whilst making a positive impact on people, communities and the planet. We make no claims to have all the answers, far from it in fact, but we hope these conversations might just get you thinking. We are learning, and hopefully you'll learn with us. So join us. The game is afoot, and it's an infinite one.
Hey Michael, good to see you again. How you doing?
I'm doing well, David. And yourself? You have been on a little drive this morning.
I know. Coming back down to Brighton. I forgot how much Brighton does not like the car. It was fun finding parking around here. But anyway, we're here. We're ready to record another session for Hospitality in the Infinite Game. So welcome back to anyone who's caught the first 3 episodes. Hope you're enjoying it so far. Today, we are talking about There Is No Planet B by Mike Berners-Lee. It's a book some of you may have come across. He is a consultant, thinker, writer, researcher on sustainability and kind of responses to the 21st century challenges. And it was just one we picked as being a kind of core text on sustainability, this whole climate change thing. And we wanted to dig into it today and just see what that means for hospitality. So, Michael, what do you think?
So yeah, the No Planet B, I think I read it about 2 years ago, and already at that point we had an imminent need for doing something. And I know right now, in the time we live in, there's a lot of people that feel like, we haven't been traveling, we used the car less, we used the train less, and we haven't had this impact on the planet the last 6 months we normally would have, which is all good, but it's not enough. Also, if you read the facts of what Mike says is that we are going towards a climate catastrophe in principle, and it's never nice to get the brutal facts in life. No. But the great thing about Mike's work is that what I really like facts, and I really like when there's some data behind it. And he's done all the data work and how this impacts, food supply, travel, energy consumption, how we live our life, how we use material things, clothing, and so on and so on. So he's done all the research on that, and he's one of the most leading scientists on this area. And there's no doubt about, we say we have now changed forever. So it's now make it or break it in principle when it comes to the environment. Because as I've said to you before we start recording here, we have the pandemic, and then we're going to probably have a recession spiced with, from a UK point of view, with some Brexit.
Oh yeah,
as a next wave. And then we probably also have, besides the cash issue, we might have some mental health challenges coming to us as well. And then we're probably going to see that we are not done with dealing with the beast of climate change, will impact our lives and the way we do business as well. So what we can do now is what Mike says as well. We can do a lot of things to stop the planet dissolving. And David Attenborough has put out a movie. If you haven't seen it yet, it's one where you need to be in the right mindset because it's quite heavy in the end.
Is that the one on Netflix that's come out recently? Yeah. And it makes you feel a bit scared for your children if you have any of those. I think he's going increasingly hard on the activism front, isn't it? Yeah. As he gets older and older. I mean, obviously he's 93 now, so he's got quite a lot of experience. But and I think I'm fascinated. Sorry to interrupt. I'm fascinated by that whole point around the kind of the hope and despair, because I do think there is a large part around climate change where sometimes, I mean, I've probably definitely suffered from it. I almost don't want to think about it because it's just so big and so complex and, in a way, a hugely inconvenient problem. I mean, Al Gore had that documentary, The Inconvenient Truth. I mean, that must be 20 years old now. Yeah. And the inconvenience of that hasn't changed. The reality is, I would love to just be able to carry on business as usual. Everything is hard enough, just trying to make things work. Do we really have to try and get involved and solve with this thing too? And I guess it's probably worth pointing out it's not going to be our job on this episode here to try and convince people who don't believe in climate change. That's probably not within our skill set and our intelligence to understand all of the arguments to do that. But I guess we have to assume that people listening to this have a sympathy and an understanding that this problem is real and there is a challenge there. And really what we're trying to explore by looking at this book is what some of those strategies, and I know you were really looking at how that really might affect hospitality, and maybe what core strategies and decisions we need to make to try and put us on that right path and make us feel like we are doing enough, I suppose. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, David. And I think the interesting thing with Mike, he also says in the book, is that we have over, especially after the Second World War, when the Industrial Revolution started, we have accumulated, power as human being, what we can do, and there's been no limits, and there is no limits anymore. But every time we become more efficient, better, we do production, we start new industries, that has an impact on the planet. And we can't keep on just impacting that. That's what he says. The data says that there's a tipping point where the planet will break. And I actually think David Attenborough, in his movie, actually makes it even more clear. He talks about 2080. It's where you see parts of the planet is unlivable. You can't have living life there. But what Mike says, yes, it is not a good place we're in, and but we can do something. Everybody can do a little bit without, now you said, the inconvenience of changing our life radically and just getting on with business. We can actually do a little bit, everyone, every day, if we start changing behavior, because he talks about it's behaviors that need to change. But before you can change behaviors, you need to have an understanding of where you are and what those small things actually means in the bigger scheme. And that is, when you read through the book, what he does. He states the problem, but he also comes up with a very simple checklist of what you can do. You can actually go and do some actions after reading that book. And that's why I like it as well.
Well, hit me with some of your actions.
Good. So I said a bit like before, we as a world species, we are using more and more energy. In principle, that's the problem. We have to generate more and more energy to do all the things we want to do to live our life. That has an amazing, credible impact on our planet. Both good, we are developing growth, but that growth has a negative impact on the climate. And we can't keep on, as I said, tapping away at the planet. It's a bit like a bank account. You can't keep on drawing on it. One day the money runs out.
Yeah, we thought the endowment would last forever, but it turns out we're spending it pretty fast now.
Yeah. So the book is there's a lot of subjects in there, and I already mentioned a lot of them. I think we will touch on something that's relevant for hospitality. We'll talk a bit about, food, approach to growth. We'll talk about, on work, people at work, how you create work environment and what that can impact positively on the planet, and then also business, and maybe a bit about values as well, and trust in the end. So food is something we all consume every day, and hospitality, we sell it to people that consume it, and there's 3 meals a day. And actually, he says we have to start with food. That's where we can make the biggest impact. He said almost up to a third of the energy consumption we use in the world comes from food. We're actually overproducing the amount of calories we need as individual. So I think it's almost a double of what we need as a human beings is consumed every day. So he said, let's start looking at how we change the way we eat, in principle. And it's very simple. He said, eat less meat, dairy, and more plants. And that's not something new, in principle. And you already see the vegan wave is happening across hospitality.
Yeah, and I was really interested to see the statistics and the way he breaks it down, the number of calories, gained per kilo of, CO2 emissions coming off, and the comparisons. It's quite stark, the differences between, say, beef and a soybean. And as someone who has always been a carnivore and eating meat, over the last few years, you can't avoid these arguments and seeing the information. And it does get to a point when you realise you can it's only through stubbornness and bloody mindedness that you can't accept those facts. So I do think, a heavy reduction on the use of eating meat for protein, particularly beef and lamb are considered to be, the worst in terms of their sustainable performance. But he even goes into how, chickens and how, even with free range chickens that are well looked after, the amount of phosphates that come out of, their droppings on the ground that will then wash into the rivers and create algae blooms and stuff. So clearly there are very complex systems that go off the back of it. I do also know, I have heard people say that if we tried to flip the entire planet to a 100% vegan diet, there would also be issues with the of trying to make that work. But I haven't seen anyone give enough facts to explain that would be as challenging as the way we currently deal with using animals for food.
While you're absolutely spot on there. While you were saying that, I was thinking, okay, let's put a bit of number on. So a human body needs around 2,300 calories a day. We are producing more than 5,000 calories a day. So we are over 100% producing, and lots of that just goes into food waste. There's a lot of focus on food waste. But actually, if we actually could stop producing so much food, there will actually be more than enough food for everyone in the world. And there's still people go hungry to bed in this world, even though we're overproducing the amount of food. And this
it's 800 million, I think, isn't it? The latest statistic of people who are undernourished or malnourished, and then another 2 billion considered to have hidden hunger, which is not having enough nutrients within their diet, so the vitamin A, the iron, the zinc, but on the surface having enough calories going into their diet. So it's clearly, as you say, it's a big problem. And I think you're right to pull out food as well. I mean, I remember recently seeing some work the SRA did, I think Andrew Stephen for Restaurant Associates, and the program they were looking at in restaurant terms points out that between 50 and 75% of your environmental impact comes through the food that you serve, how that is sourced, prepared, wasted or not. So I think it is, for any hospitality business, it is the right place to start, and you can make the biggest gains by looking at how you source that food and where it comes from, and that's the place that anyone should really be starting.
Yeah, and I think it's not only just saying, okay, well, all has to go vegan, as you said. I think also it's about where it's sourced from, you said, because there's also reality. Some parts of the world, there's not the same access to vegetables and greens like we have here in the UK. We're very lucky that we have a big agriculture history for being able in the ground. We have to do potatoes but it's actually that thing about thinking about if it's winter, then maybe not strawberries on the menu. Yeah. Because that doesn't give sense.
No, absolutely.
Because you will transport that in. So besides that, you're actually consuming something that's probably been grown in another sustainable way, because a lot of energy and light has been used to keep it up in wherever it comes from, Holland or wherever it comes from, Spain. Actually, it's also been transported. And then again, there's energy used again. So it's also about thinking about when is this in season. I also think about what is your prep for that to get it to the table. Yeah, I think that it is a complex thing, but actually if you start to think seasonal, as you say, and actually start to think local, there's actually some, over time, I know there's a cost thing, but you can only change that by starting buying something else.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because so much of it, we're trying to talk about almost being progressive and a new model for hospitality, and yet this is effectively just going back to the way things always were before we created an artificial system for delivering it in a different way to try and make food cheaper. I mean, I remember hearing Douglas McMaster from Silo talking about the food, and he said one of the problems is actually, it's not really the politically correct thing to say, but most food is too cheap. Most food should be 2 or 3 times the cost to be produced in a way that is ethical and sustainable. And that can come across as a very kind of easy, privileged, middle-class, liberal opinion. But it's probably true. And the reality is that if that is true, and we do need to make things work that way, then we need to not just alter behaviour, but we need to alter the systems to make that the norm, rather than the kind of just the bit that the rich people can afford. which I think is certainly an interesting challenge around that. But yeah, the idea of going local and seasonal, I mean, it sounds it shouldn't. It's not a revolution, is it? But it's just, it should be the basic starting point. Although it does get complex, right? Because you want to drink wine, you want to have coffee. That's not going to be, well, wine maybe increasingly you can get some, particularly in the UK, but coffee is not it's not coming from the UK.
And we probably never will.
No, exactly. So I think there's some complexity in the system. I think you'd have to dig into. But
yeah, and I think also it's important here that you have to start somewhere, and it's not about being. I often say to people when you talk about doing something like you want to change, because we are locked in the systems we're in, but it's the intent and actually taking small things and moving forward. So like where you can make a big change is like going through, as you said, where are you sourcing things from, what kind of could we actually have a smaller menu. That actually, because often the menus in my world, sometimes there's too much choice, and people have accepted now in the world we live in with the pandemic, I don't need that much choice. You are happy to go on and say they have one product to take away, I will take that. So I don't think we as human beings need all that choice, and that's a problem again why we're doing overproduction of calories in the world, is that the Western world just wants too much choice, and now suddenly we have other parts of the world that's catching up economically, like India and China now, they also want choice. And I think that's where the burning platform from a food point of view. And touching on what you said before, I think Julian Metcalf, the founder of Pret, and also Michael Pollan, the food expert from the US, and they also talk about, it should be a right to have healthy food, or organic food should be available to any human being. It was in the past, everybody could afford potatoes, but now, as Michael Pollan says, it's cheaper in some villages in Mexico to buy Coca-Cola than get water and vegetables. So you can see that's the challenge in a way, because it's subsidized. There's something that's gone wrong on the scale there, and I think it's just about, as you say, how do we value food in a way, because in the past, I think you can see that in France and Italy still, a bigger majority than a UK household in those countries would go to buy food that's good for you or better quality. It doesn't mean it's artisan, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about good produce, because actually that's where it starts. If you have good produce, you don't need to add so many things, salt, sugar and stuff like that, to make it taste good, because it automatically just tastes better. So I think there is a whole, there's a complex thing here, you say, because it's not something a restaurateur can change or restaurant owner, but they can actually start doing small things that actually would make a very big difference. And of course, food for food waste is one of them. And again, as you said, there's already a vegan approach. But I'm a bit, sometimes I think that there's lots of good thing in the vegan wave right now, as long as it doesn't become substitute and actually become engineered vegan food. Because I'm also a bit scared when I hear about engineered food, especially with soybeans and so on, because that's also not good for the planet, because then you have to cut down the rainforest. And we need the wild land, the rainforest, to actually to get the planet to breed. So we cannot, like David Attenborough shows in that movie, we keep on cutting down forests. We're going to be out of fresh air and water at some point, and there's going to be a catastrophe. And he draw that picture. Let's not go into that. But what I think is interesting is that we need to rewilding. We let nature grow wild again, and actually stop trying to engineer too many things with the planet, and actually cut down on animal farming. That's one of the biggest things. But coming back to the vegan thing, I think it's really good. You just have to be careful it doesn't become a commercial thing, and you are vegan or not vegan, because it can almost be a bit like with the smokers back in the old days, when suddenly you're not allowed to smoke anymore. You're almost naughty when you were a smoker. That's people's individual choice. So there's the vegans are not better than anyone else. They're taking a very good choice because it's good for the planet. I totally agree with that. But also we need to find a way where we can take people on this journey, because it's like, it's years. It's 40, 50 years of behaviors we need to adjust.
It's really interesting. And I think as soon as you start getting into those kind of conversations, I'm always torn, because part of me agrees entirely with the principles and the direction and the idea of that, and I also believe that you need leaders to kind of push in a direction and to kind of highlight this stuff. I'm always very nervous of the word should being used in pretty much any context ever, because I think if you zoom all the way out, when we're talking about climate change and saving the planet, actually I'm pretty sure the planet's going to be fine. It just might not be inhabitable by humans or any other life forms similar to us or that are around with us now on that planet. Yep. So actually what we're talking about is really preservation of our species and way of life. Now you could conceivably, someone could choose, well, I'm not fussed about that, and then they can carry on they're living the way they are and their business as usual. And the fact that climate change is such a slow motion car crash historically, a bit faster now to be honest, a bit harder to ignore, but someone could do that. And can I as a philosopher, can I disagree with that point of view? I don't know if I can, but I do think that if you buy into the idea as he outlines in the book about all human beings have value, all sentient beings have value, then from that principle develops a kind of allergy to self-entitlement, that what we want should not come at the expense of others. And therefore, for me, if you believe that principle, then you have to look at addressing climate change and how we affect the planet, because it will affect other people. And that's my own motivation for it. I mean, I want to live, as I said before, a generous, happy life where I can be with my family and my friends and I can travel and eat at nice restaurants and have nice food. But I really do not want that to come at anyone else's expense, or the planet's. And I think for me that is the argument I get to, and then you can build everything else off the back of it. So I always tend to zoom out a bit far, but
I think you're spot on again, because also it's about, I look at my kids and think, what kind of planet do I leave them, because that also decides what kind of opportunities they have. There's not going to be great opportunities if we are struggling for surviving as a species, because then that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah,
we're actually going to go back almost in time. And maybe sometimes I think also he asked the question: do we actually always need to evolve in the speed we've done, especially the last 20 to 30 years, the last 3 decades? Maybe there's no need for that. Actually, maybe it is maybe we actually need to turn down for the growth.
Well, that's exactly what Kate Raworth talks about in Donut Economics. One of the principles, the last one on the list there, was it number 7, was that we need to become agnostic about growth. It's not that growth is positive and not having any growth is negative or declining is negative. We just need to, that is just a variable or a metric within the life cycle of a civilization, a society, a company, that will change across its natural life and natural existence. And I think we kind of live in a culture where we idolize growth. Like a company that doubles, triples, quadruples in size, has these huge ambitions, we almost without question look up to, without thinking, not without thinking maybe, but without really digging into, is that good? What are you doing that for? How's that going to affect everything? What are you replacing? Or are you just using up more resources in pursuit of our own individual kind of ego-driven life to try and be the best we can be and do what we want to do? So I do think it's a challenging concept, but yeah, we do need to again zoom out, and then. But I guess we'll deal with another episode. We'll look at that whole purpose profit conundrum, because I do think it's complex and it's easy to slip into a kind of academic, detached or moral point of view and just say, hey, it should all be this and we've got to make the world a better place. But I think we need to deal with this podcast, we need to be actually asking some of those harder questions on the flip side of okay, well, how do you actually make that work, and what does that mean, and does everyone really have to buy into that? I think that's really where it gets quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's what, as we said before, we don't have all the answers, but we're trying to figure it out, aren't we? What could it look like?
Definitely.
What is the things we need to talk more about? Because it's a bit like anything else. It's a bit like when you heard a lot of leadership experts talk about in a moment, we're in a crisis. You can only talk and act out of a crisis. So you need to talk about your problems to solve them, but also you need to act on them. And it's a bit like the same with the climate change thing. And then instead of making it that thing that sits over in the corner, start talking about. So again, coming back to what can we then do in hospitality? We talked a bit about, there's a lot already plant-based on the menu, and think about where you're sourcing things from. Again, food waste. You heard the number, it's double up.
Yeah.
So if you can do something around food waste, every little 1% you can improve on your food waste every day, or behavior around food waste. If it's buying into technology that helps you getting a better overview, there's a great technology out there today that can help you with food waste. I know there's a company called Winnow that work with hotels and big catering operator, but also just getting disciplined about what goes in the bin, make it visible, like Silo have done, and Dr. Master, they make it very visible. They have no bins in the kitchen. There's a rule of no bin, and they have a compost machine that takes everything else outside called Bertie, where they put everything in, and they're trying to reuse everything they have in that kitchen in some kind of way. So that's again, go and see what they're doing and see what can you take out of that. You don't need to be 100% like that, but what can you actually, the small things you can change around waste in here.
Well, and the other thing with waste is that actually it's one of those areas of being more sustainable that can have a direct effect on your costs, because the less you waste, the less money you're throwing in the bin, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. So there is a natural alignment between sustainability and commerciality in that particular instance. Yeah. So if you can ingrain the behavioural change to build your culture that is not really acceptable, from that purpose-driven point, it also ties into the bottom line, which is the kind of double win that no one can say no to.
And, the interesting thing is that, and I'm actually not, I think of it, like you indicated, I'm not against meat and dairy. But I think it's about thinking about where does this meat and dairy come from? What kind of life have these animals have? What has been put in these animals to serve this? And I think that's where, operators and hospitality leaders can start asking those questions, so they are very aware about from the source it comes from, and don't only look at the price. If the price is too good to be true, there's probably something wrong where it comes from. It's probably not the best in the world. So it's actually not saying no to have meat on the menu, but when you choose to have meat, make sure it comes from a good source. And again, it's a complex world, I know, and we can start talking about sourcing and accreditation, and is the eggs for a good place, is this farm actually existing, and all that. But that's not what we're talking about. But again, maybe start thinking about, because I also think this is going to be interesting from a consumer point of view. I can hear that what I'm tromming up in the market is people starting asking more about where things comes from, and if I eat meat in this place, how has this animal been treated? Has it actually been pumped with medicine, and they're very aware about that. Does it come from the other side of the world? How have this been fished? Is this overfishing? And so on. So there is starting to be a wave, and I know it's still a small part of the market, maybe not the masses, but I think that as people start now to take the thing in, they had time to watch Netflix.
Yeah,
you will see a lot of behavioral change, and that's also where I hear from some operator what they're selling now.
Yeah.
They're selling definitely more plant-based options just because people have become more aware. And they're also aware they need to be healthy and strong with a pandemic out there, because food fuels your immune system, first of all, and plants are probably better for us. We all feel a bit better when we have a bit more plants, I think. Energy consumption. So let's just touch on that quickly. There's a lot you can do, especially when we are in this moment of reset. There's a lot of new things coming in, new concepts. Maybe you're coming back. There's probably a lot of thinking you can do around how you're gonna install electricity. I know in the city you can't have solar cells maybe and stuff like that, but there's maybe things already there where you can start thinking about it. Water consumption. Water is a big issue in restaurant. I can remember that myself, trying to reduce water use. Especially because the tap is just running.
Yes, so exactly. There's two parts, isn't there? One is how you set it up to be efficient in the first place, and then the second is definitely behavioural change. I was talking to an area manager for a pub group, and he said one of his absolute pet hates was when he'd go round to look at all of the restaurant or the pubs, he'd go back into the kitchen and the taps would be running, the pans would be boiling, just ready obviously to be able to respond as quickly as possible to what they're doing or what the tasks they need to perform, but it's just hideously wasteful and inefficient, and we do need to adjust that. I mean, from that perspective, from a design perspective, when we look at it, that's the kind of termed operational carbon. When we're looking at how much gas and electricity we're using, water usage I guess doesn't really come into operational carbon, but that whole energy and efficiency is quite a key thing to look at when you're setting up a restaurant. It is one of the areas that we find more energy efficient equipment can be more expensive at the outset, which is, it does make it a challenge for some people. But I think there are other strategies you can look at in terms of how you heat and cool the space. Are there passive things you can do that aren't that expensive? An opening window can be a brilliant way to cool a space, and it's not expensive. Again, some of these solutions are looking backwards, not forwards. It depends. There's clearly so many variables involved in any sort of commercial kitchen and restaurant environment, but it's always worth seeing what you can do to reduce those, because as with everything else with the food waste, if we reduce the energy we use and the water we use, it's gonna save money, which is always what we want.
Yeah, we take the food and the energy. There's an interesting project going on right now. It's called the Gigi app, and they're trying to create like a dashboard where you actually report in your numbers. So you need to report food waste in a specific way. You need to use your electricity in a specific way, and actually you can then start seeing what your role is in a local area where you live. So this is run by AI, machine learning. And I think machine learning would help us a lot as we go on. You see it's coming in on scheduling now in the industry, but actually where it really could make some both profit from profit point of view, but also for an impact on the planet is definitely around food. And that's when Winnow has been around for years. And I think you will see at this, as people now digitalize, or the industry are digitalizing in this speed, I think this is going to be one of the biggest areas where you will find both profitability, because we need that to survive. And I'm not saying, let's not talk about growth of business. Let's talk about sustainable growth, where actually you use your growth to invest back into the business, and maybe you don't grow at the rate you did before, and you touched about growth before, and we can talk a bit about that when we come to profit and purpose. But I think the problem is also, Tom Peters said once, get measured, get done. I think it's about how do we measure success as we go forward, on and not only on food waste, but from a business point of view and a growth point of view. And I think it starts with us being a bit critical and ask our questions. Are we actually doing things that is like Mike says in his book? He says that why are you here? Are you here just to make profit, or are you here actually to impact some of the big challenges in the world besides? Because you need to meet the organization to survive, but then when you found the business model that works for that, how do you then use that profit to make a positive impact on people, communities, and the planet?
Absolutely. And I think that's really interesting, is it? Because I guess we're starting talking about there's no planet B, and the big part of that is around the climate change and sustainability, but you almost can't deal with the problems and challenges that big without dealing with the other questions around populations and economics and all of those other pieces that tie into that, right? Because that is part of the mix. It's a whole systemic change that we're talking about requiring to happen, which is a challenge for businesses, right? Because how do we then, as business owners, how do we try and build a framework for our businesses that can actually respond to that in a meaningful way? Obviously, we've outlined some tips there and some direction for hospitality around food and waste and energy, but I guess finding that structure that we can work within to be better is what we're craving for, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the journey we're on. We don't have that model, as I said before, but we are like, we had so many conversations, David and I, and there's other people we talk with as well. There's like, there must be a different model for hospitality. And, Mike's book doesn't give you the model, but he maybe helps you quantify things that you maybe couldn't. So you couldn't talk about it in a business context. And that's what I love about it. It's the facts again. But the last thing I want to touch on when we talk about Mike's book, and there's much more in it. There's so much facts and data. We will not stand and talk about all the data here. The book is available on Amazon, amazing book. But I think the last thing he touched on in the book is very important. If we need to get this to work, it's all about us as people. It's us as an individual that need to make small behavioral change. It doesn't mean it's only business's responsibility. Everybody has a responsibility within that. But again, how can you actually get people change best when they are comfortable and safe? This is a very difficult situation where now, let's not take it in the context of pandemic. But if we think back about, we all know what create great performance in the business is create an environment people thrive in. And I think he mentioned that in that book, and I thought that's interesting. He actually said the starting point is that actually we create everyday life where we are not worried about things, so we take shortcuts. So we actually are thriving in jobs. So actually trying to create great workplaces, especially in the times we're in now. I think this is going to be critical to retain, to take it a business context, retain talent. Talent will go where there's meaning and purpose behind what you're doing. Yeah, I know people need to get a job, and maybe they take a job, but that will be a very interim period to the point where they find the place that actually makes them tick. And I think that's where we can, because we can do so many quick wins in from a hospitality point of view when it comes to, we can change the way we serve food. We can change the way we consume energy. We just need to start talking about this story, because I know a lot of operators out there doing it. So I think, again, if you can create, a great, meaningful job, a mission that's bigger than growing 100 restaurants, make sure people are fairly paid, things are working in that place, and thereby you're starting putting people first. And I think actually some of those other things, all these behavioral things we want to change, we want to see in the world will happen, because we know about, more than 83% of the population in the world, according to Gallup, is not very engaged when they go to work and feel switched off. And I know it's a complex thing. It's not the employer's fault, but the employer can do something about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just reflecting on, you mentioned put people first, and I know that's a big thing for you generally with Hospitality Mavericks, but I think it's interesting that we're talking about sustainability and the planet, but actually just from zooming out, we're really talking about the human race and the human species, and that the best way to deal with that is to zoom right into the individual person, and then the individual actions that we can all take, which does make it a much more manageable scale for us to understand. Because on the other side, I do agree with you. I think artificial intelligence, machine learning is probably going to be, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to throw the theory out there anyway. I think that it's only going to be with those elements, the abilities that come with AI, that we'll be able to solve and process the complexity of the systems thinking required to make those things at a bigger scale. So I guess the question for me comes back to, again, what should we be doing as individuals, which you've kind of outlined some of that stuff there, and then what do we as companies, as businesses, how do we respond to those challenges, and how do we build a framework that we can make sure that we're holding ourselves to account to be making those changes. And I guess that will lead us nicely into our next episode, where we dig into the idea of B Corps and hopefully see if they've got an answer for us.
Yes, David, I think that's a perfect way to end this episode.
Excellent.
So that's the end for today. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope that it sparked off an idea or two for you. We'll make sure to include any links and references in the show notes, but if you'd like to start a conversation, you can email michael@hospitalitymavericks.com or david@objectspaceplace.com. You can also find them roaming around on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect. Finally, if you're enjoying this series, please consider letting the world know by honouring us with a 5-star rating or even giving us a review. Okay, goodbye for now. Catch you next time for more discussions on hospitality and the infinite game.